The year 2176, Earth was dying. Oceans had retreated, leaving cracked beds of salt, and cities had turned to ruin. Choked by endless dust storms, civilization hung by a thread, with the last of humanity surviving in a fortified in caves guarded by soldiers and ruled by scarcity. But one glimmer of hope remained, a place whispered about in legends and ancient satellite data, Atlas Island. Atlas Island, according to the few maps left, was an unspoiled paradise, hidden away from civilization. Somehow it had been shielded from the world's decay, harboring forests, rivers, and lush fields. Scientists and government leaders pinned humanity's last hope on the island, believing it could be a sanctuary for repopulation, a safe haven where they could rebuild from scratch. A reconnaissance team was quickly assembled, led by Dr. Susan Rain, a seasonal biologist who had dedicated her life to finding sustainable solutions. Alongside her were soldiers and survivalists and specialists, including a young brash soldier named Sony Torres. Their mission: scout Atlas Island, assess its resources, and determine if it's livable. But underlining the mission was another darker object. If any threats were found, they were to neutralize them. Humanity, after all, would not let the lifeline slip away easily. The grueling journey across the Dead Seas, the team landed on Atlas Island. It was more than they could have imagined. Lush vegetation stretched as far as the eye could see. Rivers sparkled like liquid crystal, and the air was thick with the sense of a vibrant, untouched ecosystem. Susan's heart swelled with hope as she stepped onto the soil, taking in the beauty around her. For the first time in years, she felt the pulse of life beneath her feet. But within hours of settling into camp, things began to feel off. Massive footprints were discovered near the river, each one easily 5 feet across. Trees in the distance had been snapped clean in half, as if by some immense force. Sonny, ever the even soldier, kept his rifle close, eyes scanning the horizon, his instincts humming with unease. Dr. Rain, whatever did this isn't a wild animal, he said, pointing to the broken trees. It's something bigger. That night, as they prepared to rest, the ground began to rumble. Trees shook, tents rattled, and the distant sound of a low rhythm thumping grew louder. Then they saw them. Emerging from the shadows of the forest were giants, massive, towering figures over 25 feet tall, with skin like rough stone and eyes gleaming like ambers. They carried enormous clubs made from entire trees, each swing capable of crushing anything in their path. The giants moved slowly but purposely, their massive feet sinking into the earth with each step. And then, in one startling movement, one of them leaped into the air, covering a distance that left the soldiers and scientists in shock. The giants' booming voices sounded like the roll of distant thunder. Hip, 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 hip. Their gestures deliberate. They approached the humans' camp, inspecting them with a mix of curiosity and displeasure. Sonny and the other soldiers, seeing the giant's size and their weapons, assumed the worst. "Open fire!" Sonny shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Soldiers' bullets peppered the air, striking the giants, but doing little more than irritating them. The giants roared, swinging their clubs, smashing the ground around the humans with terrifying force. Some soldiers were flung through the air like rag dolls, their bodies crumpling upon impact. Susan watched in horror, her stomach lurching as she saw her colleagues fall one by one. "Stop! Don't shoot!" Susan screamed, desperate to call off the attack, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. Sonny and the others continued firing, driven by fear as the giants continued to say, "Hip, hip, hip, hip." The giants retaliated, and it was like nothing Susan has ever seen. They leaped into the air, landing with explosive force that sent shockwaves through the ground, knocking humans off their feet and sending equipment flying. The ground itself seemed to buckle under the giants' assault, causing fissures and uprooting trees. The few remaining team members scattered, running for their lives into the dense forest. Only Susan and Sonny managed to slip away in the confusion, hiding behind a cluster of rocks as the giants continued their rampage. Out of breath and covered in dirt, Susan turned to Sonny, anger blazing in her eyes. "Why did you fire on them? They weren't attacking us. They were coming at us with clubs, Susan. What were we supposed to do, stand there and get crushed?" Sonny snapped back, his face pale with fear but resolve. "You think these things are just gonna let us take the island, Susan?" Susan fell silent, gripping her arm where a stray piece of shrapnel had cut her skin. As they sat there catching their breath, they noticed something odd. The giants had stopped their chase and were instead pacing around the humans' abandoned camp, inspecting their equipment, tossing tents aside and crushing their abandoned weapons. They don't want us here," Susan whispered, realization dawning on her. "They're protecting this land. They see us as a threat." "So what?" Sonny shot back. "We don't have a choice. This place is all we've got. If they're in the way, we have to deal with them." But Susan couldn't shake the feeling that these giants weren't just mindless creatures. They moved with purpose, with an intelligence that went beyond primal instincts. They were guardians, defenders of the islands that somehow thrived while the rest of the world withered. She wondered if their reaction was less about malice and more about survival. Survival for them and their land that they protected. As dawn broke, Susan made her decision. She turned to Sonny, her voice steady. "We need to leave." "Are you kidding me?" Sonny looked at her in disbelief, etched on his face. "We came all this way for this place. You think they're just gonna let us go back and give up?" "They'll kill us if we try to stay, Sonny," Susan replied, her tone firm. "They'll do anything to keep this place untainted. We need to find a way to warn our others. Tell them this isn't a place we can just claim." Sonny's expression shifted from anger to resignation. He knew she was right, though he hated to admit it. With the giants looming in the distance, they made their way through the thick forest, avoiding the giants' patrols, their movement guided by the rising sun. When they finally reached the shoreline where their boats were anchored, they cast one last glance at the island. The giants stood around the forest edge, watching them, their face unreadable but their stance unmistakable. They were the guardians of Atlas Island, and they were protected at any cost. As they sailed away, Susan could hear the giants yelling, "Hip, hip, 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 hip." Susan couldn't shake the image of the giants from her mind. They weren't just threats to be eliminated. They were something ancient, part of the island itself, and entwined with it as the trees and rivers. She realized humanity could not simply take from the world without consequences. If they wanted to survive, they'll have to learn to live with respect for the land and its guardians. In the days that followed, Susan and Sonny returned to the last of civilization, carrying a message as old as the earth itself. Some places were not meant to be conquered. Some places need to be left wild, or they will face giants they couldn't defeat, not with weapons, not with force, but only with humanity and reverence. Susan leaves the room and General White turns around and says, "Set up a strike team. Set up a strike team immediately. We're gonna take this island. I mean, now."